All right, what's going on, everybody? It is Tuesday, June 29th. I want to cover something that I probably have covered many times in the past, but it came up in a conversation the other day, and I think I need to go over it a little bit. And that is this notion, this belief that the Fed lends money to the federal government. That's wrong, okay? And I'm gonna just work through the mechanics and explain it to you. But first, let's go over what the Fed is and what its role is. I've, been over this many times before. Number one, all right, the Fed is a bank. And as a bank, it can lend against collateral. Number two, the Fed is a regulator, and that's really important because that is a very important job of the Fed. It regulates the financial markets. All right, and a lot of times I have to say, I'll be honest, I think it's a little bit lax in that regard. And number three, the Fed is a price setter by virtue of its rate setting authority. Okay, so you got the three functions of the Fed. It's a bank, it lends, it's a regulator, and it's a price setter, okay? The Fed cannot lend directly to the federal government. It's not set up that way. There is no mechanism or channel or operational way that it can do that, okay? So let's just understand that. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you to find any literature in the Federal Reserve System or the Treasury that says the opposite. You're not going to find it because it is not there. The Fed is precluded by statute from lending directly to the Treasury. Now, some people say, that's semantics because when the Fed buys assets, when it buys securities, then it's kind of providing the Treasury with money in a sort of a roundabout way. And that's false too. Let's go over it. When the Fed buys securities, it is buying it in the secondary market. Basically, it's buying it from primary dealers whose function is to, engage with the Fed. And those securities are, they could be treasuries, they could be bills, whatever, mortgage-backed securities. Those are securities that have already been purchased by, the private sector, by the dealers. Okay, the dealers buy the securities in auction. Maybe private citizens buy them in auction. So the securities that the Fed buys, they're already out there. Somebody already paid for them with US dollars. The Fed is just buying them and, and taking them for itself, taking those securities for itself. And when the Fed buys those securities, it credits the seller's account with reserves, okay? The reserves, or if you want to call it cash, if you want to call it money, does not go into the Treasury's account. It goes into the banking system as reserves, okay? Now, getting back to the fact that the Fed buys securities from entities that have already purchased them, okay, dealers or private citizens, the money to buy those Treasury securities, and we're talking about US dollars because that's the only thing you can use to purchase Treasury securities, those dollars had to have been there in the first place. Where did they get there? Where did they get there? Or how did they get there? They got there from government spending itself. Mike, how does that happen? Doesn't the government have to sell bonds in order to spend? No, it doesn't. Mike, what about the debt ceiling? Congress has to approve an increase in the debt ceiling. Yes, but that is an artificially imposed constraint. That's a constraint that Congress says, okay, we're going to appropriate or we're going to spend up to this level, and then they say, Then we got to negotiate over this. But they always end up raising the debt ceiling. And then what happens? Then they decide on a new level of spending in a budget. They start to spend first. This is very important. They spend first, and the sale of treasuries comes after that because it's a reserve drain, okay? And when you think about it, that is the only sequence that it can be possible, all right? Because let's say the Treasury was constrained by first having to sell securities. After a while, it would sell so many securities, it would drain the entire economy of dollars, okay? And then nobody would have dollars to buy securities. But then you say, well, Mike, the Fed could buy securities from the economy and add the reserves. No, the Fed has to deal with primary dealers who already bought those securities. So the spending comes first. The sale of treasuries comes second, which is a reserve drain. It's not borrowing. The Fed's operations, their purchases of assets, yield nothing to the Treasury's account. Nothing goes into the Treasury's account. Those purchases of securities add reserves to the banking system. All right? So the Fed cannot, there is no way, there is no operational way, there is no mechanical way that the Fed can lend to the government, and it doesn't. It does not lend to the government. So please, listen to this a few times. Try to understand it. When people say the Fed, the only reason why they're spending so much is because the Fed, is giving the government money. No, it's not set up that way. It cannot happen. Congress decides on a budget, the money is spent, the dollars flow into the economy, then the Treasury sells securities, which drains out some of those dollars. That helps the Fed maintain its interest rate. Then, only then, does the Fed go in, if it wants to, and buys some of those securities, okay? And then replacing some of those reserves. It does not go into the Treasury's account. It doesn't go anywhere near the Treasury's account. All right? And the Fed holds on to those securities, and it earns money from those interest, and the Treasury pays the Fed interest. I've been over this. The Treasury pays the Fed interest, and then the Fed gives it back to the Treasury. That's a cockamamie, stupid setup that we have, which is ridiculous. It makes less sense than a monopoly game. It's just stupidity. I mean, literally, the Fed could rip up, 5.2 trillion of treasuries, and that would reduce the debt by the debt, right? That would reduce it by 5.2 trillion. It's cockamamie. It's ridiculous. That's how it works. Please, folks, try to understand this. Don't, people sending me Twitter things, the Fed is lending money to the government. No, it doesn't happen that way. All right? Educate yourself. If nothing else, then to just have the self-satisfaction, not even that you're going to be able to convince anybody, because you probably won't. I've been doing this a long time. Very few people I convince. But okay, fine. Just to have the self-satisfaction of knowing how things work. You're intelligent. You're at a higher level. Enjoy. Don't forget, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and go to my website, pitbulleconomics.com. Sign up for a 30-day free trial of MMT Trader. See you tomorrow. Bye.